Chapter 35, Plant Structure, Growth, and Development. Very nice atypical plant specimen right there. All right, when it comes to plants, you really have three main organs. You've got the roots, which do what? Hopefully you're saying that they absorb water and nutrients. The leaves, that's a photosynthetic organ that's going to go ahead and suck up all the sunlight. And then you have the stems that carries water up to the very top of the plant from the roots and carries the sugar once they're produced from the leaves down into the roots, and when they're needed again from the roots back up to the leaves. So water only goes up the plant, sugar, glucose, C6H12O6 goes both down and up the plant. All right, your root system, that's going to be your roots. Not only are they very important for water absorption and nutrient absorption, but they're also extremely important for anchoring the plant, so the plant doesn't get moved around by the wind or rain or what have you, okay? Stems and leaves, obviously they're needed for photosynthesis. So, like we said, roots, organ that anchors a vascular plant. Vascular means it's got a xylem and a phloem, okay? In the soil, it absorbs nutrients and waters, and it's going to store your carbs. Like your carrot, think of your carrot. The part that we're actually eating is the root, right? The green part above the soil, that's what's photosynthesis is happening, and then the sugar is being stored down in the root. Come August, we got a nice plump, beautiful carrot. If we don't yank it out of the ground, come winter time, that storage is going to have shriveled up because as there's been less and less sun, the plant will actually produce less and less glucose for itself, and it'll use up its storage in the roots, making the carrot become very small. All right, eudicots, fancy schmancy new name for dicots. These guys have tap roots, whereas the monocots have that fibrous root system. So if you think of again, a carrot or a weed, when you yank it out, some weeds have nice, thick main root with a little bit of hairs off the ends. That's going to be a tap root. And then the weeds that you yank, and they've got a little itty bitty root system, nothing real consistent, that's more of your fibrous root. That's your monocot, all right? Your monocots have a fibrous root system. They're better for light rainfall and will prevent erosion very well because they're such a strong root system. There's not one main one, there's a bunch of little ones, and it holds the soil there better. Root hairs, very important. Without root hairs, you would not increase the surface area, and without that increase in surface area, you wouldn't be able to absorb more water or more nutrients. So very important I would know about root hairs. Believe it or not, there are different types of roots. You've got prop roots. Prop roots are going to support your taller trees. So if you see right here, I've got a picture for you to show you a sample. All right, that's the type of tree that is called a hala. You've got storage roots. They're going to store your food, your water. Okay, look at that. You've got the radishes, the turnips, you've got carrots, and beets, beautiful beets. Actually, I said turnips, no turnips, it's beets. My apologies. You've got strangling aerial roots. I don't know if you can tell in this picture, but that is a doorway. That is how high up the roots are with the plant growing above it. Seeds germinate in the branches of other trees, and then they'll send aerial roots to the ground. All right, and that's called the strangler fig in that one. Buttress roots. Buttress roots, and I'm going to walk away for a second. These guys were actually used in architecture. Back in the days of them building Notre Dame, they had to use a special architectural structure called buttresses, after the buttress roots. And the buttresses, so if you look, this right here is Notre Dame, right? Typical front, beautiful, gorgeous view. And if you look right here, from a top-down view, it's in the shape of a crucifix, okay? Well, that very skinny, long, very tall building, if you've ever been around it, you know what I'm talking about, it's very, very tall. That structure would not be supported if it didn't have these buttresses on the ends supporting them, because those tall walls would wobble too much with wind and fall over. So, buttresses, architectural structure, and in this case, types of roots. Common in very wet environments to give support to the trunk because they tend to have a very shallow root system. Pneumatophores. Pneumatophores, if you've ever been Around cypress trees, you've seen them. They're also known as cypress knees. That's the common name for them. These are in areas where there's very little oxygen in the water. The roots are able to get the oxygen in that way. If there's a lot of mud and low circulation, so there's not good aeration of the water. And what the root system does is it shoots up these little extensions, these pneumatophores, up out of the water so that those knees are exposed to the atmospheric oxygen and can take in the oxygen in that manner. So, very funny, we always think roots being very simple, not necessarily. I'm on slide 5. Stems. Organs separate or raise the leaves, exposing them to sunlight, right? Because if a plant doesn't grow nice and tall, it's not going to reach that sunlight. If it doesn't reach that sunlight, it is not going to survive. Nodes are points at which leaves are attached. You got the inner node, that's going to be that segment of stem between the nodes. Now, then we have axillary buds and we have apical or terminal buds. An apical or terminal bud is going to be the very tip, all right, where you're going to see developing leaves and compact series of nodes and inner nodes. And an auxiliary bud, apologies, it will allow for a lateral shoot, a branch. So we're coming into the spring season right now, and you're probably going to hear pretty soon we need to prune our bushes and our trees. When you prune it, you're cutting off the apical bud. And when you cut off that apical bud, you're causing that particular plant to be bushier because it's going to push for auxiliary buds to occur. And it's going to cause those lateral shoots. But you've got to cut that apical. That's your way of waking up the tree or the brush and making it go ahead and start growing. And this is how, that's where it's very important to know what you want your particular tree or bush to look like. Do you want it to be bushy? Do you want it to be tall? How do you want it? So, if you want it to be nice and tall, you leave it alone. It's going to grow. It's not going to do anything. If you want it to be bushier, shallower, or maybe bushier and then allow it slowly to grow, then you're going to want to cut the apical bud, prune it, and nice have fuller trees or bushes. Inhibition of auxiliary bud by an apical bud. That's where we have to come in and we have to cut it to stimulate the growth so that it'll go out laterally, as we just said earlier, okay? Leaves, main photosynthetic organism. It's made up of a blade. Petiole. Blade, think of your grass. So, it's funny, we talked about this in the day class. So think about your grass blades, right? Your grass blades are vertical. By being vertical, they have two surfaces that are both going to allow for photosynthesis to occur, all right? So as you are sitting, because there's only a very short period of time when the sun is perfectly at noon o'clock above those blades of grass. So by having vertical blades, you're allowing two sides to be exposed to sunlight, allowing for more glucose to be produced. Petiole, these guys are little stalks, okay? They'll join leaf systems to the nodes. Grasses and other monocots will not have these. Okay. Here's where stems get even more interesting. You've got something called tendrils. If you have ever been around a vine, you'll see them growing, grapevines, blanking on some other vines right now. But they'll grow up, and then as they're growing, you'll see these little extensions coming out right here. Those extensions are ways for the plant to reach and grasp onto something to allow more control of the stem as it's growing in height, trying to get as tall and as big as it can. So if you think about vines, the main stem of vine, pretty small in comparison to trees of that typical height. So that's thanks to those tendrils. Thanks to those tendrils, you're able to do that. You've got spines, that's your cacti. Believe it or not, the spines on a cacti right here are photosynthetic. So photosynthesis is occurring there, but by minimizing the leaves, you have minimal loss of water from the leaves themselves because you don't have all that surface area with all the stomatas that are nice and open, allowing for loss of water. Then, of course, you have storage leaves. That's your succulents. That's why if you've ever taken a little leaf off a succulent, cut it in half and squeeze it a little bit, see some water juicing coming out, because they actually store their water there, okay? And then bracts. These are, reproductive leaves, okay? They'll fall, take root in the soil. There's a video on the lab that's talking about type of tree that releases its seeds into the water and it gets carried far away. Really cool. That's the reproductive leaves. That's a really good example of reproductive leaves. Rocks are brightly colored leaves that are acting as pollinators. So our beautiful poinsettias, those red, what looks like petals, are actually not petals, they're leaves that have turned red in order to attract the pollinators to the true flower, which is what's in the middle right there. Bougainvillea, do not ask me to say that word in English. Those words I should say in English. Type of beautiful tree, bush, what have you. Very brightly colored. You've got purples and pinks and whites and just all these gorgeous colors. Again, don't do well in my yard, do well in my parents'. And but same thing there. Their leaves will be green until that flower is ready to be pollinated, and then it'll turn into that purple or the pink or the white or whatever color it is. And in order to attract the pollinators to come and have it in pollinated. Okay, when it comes to plants, you have three types of tissue. You have dermal tissue, just like us, dermis, right? Epidermis, that's the outer covering, the protective part of the plant. You've got the vascular, that's your xylem and your phloem, and then you've got your ground, basically the tissue that's between the dermal and the vascular, okay? Dermal tissue, outer protective, to limit water loss, because that's your first, remember, when plants went out from the water environment, aquatic environment, onto land, that was the number one thing they had to overcome, was not losing any water, to minimize that water loss as much as possible. Can't say not lose any water, there's no such thing, but minimize it. So they had to have that thick, waxy cuticle to minimize the water loss. So, dermal tissue, number one defense, just like us, right? Okay, epidermis, layer of thickly packed cells in non-woody plants. The cuticle, that's the waxy coating on the epidermis, okay? See right here, vascular, that's your xylem and your phloem. We'll talk about those. Your dermal, and then the ground's right in between, all right? And of course, between monocot and dicot, there's different setups. We'll talk about that, and you'll also see that in your lab. Vascular tissue carries out long distant transport between the roots and shoots system. Okay, peeps, xylem, follow the alphabet, carries water, WX. Phloem carries sugar. P and S are closer to each other than X and W. Okay? Xylem, W, right before, right after W comes the X as a xylem. Xylem carries water, phloem carries sugar. Xylem only carries water up the plant. Phloem is going to carry it either down to the plant, it's what we call source to sink, or up the plant, in which case this would be the source, and this would be the sink. This would be the source of production, this would be the source of storage, okay? So, summer months, it's going to go from the plants, from the leaves, apologies, down to the roots. As it starts to get colder, less sunlight available, it's going to go from the roots back up to the plant as the plant needs it, depending on the availability of sunlight during those times. Ground tissue, neither dermal nor vascular. It's used for storage, photosynthesis, and support. I apologize I don't have these two yellow. Just be aware because you're probably going to hear about them in the, well, not probably, you're going to hear about them in the lab. So I apologize for that, but I want to make sure you see that right there. Okay? Go back and look at the pith, the tissue internal to the vascular. So that's inside the vascular. And then the cortex, that's outside the vascular. Again, there's a difference between monocots and dicots. The lab's going to help you out a lot with that. Parenchyma cells, these are your metabolic cells. And that is where most of your photosynthesis is going to get carried out. They're capable of cell division to replace any kind of damaged cells. That's your ground tissue. Okay? And we're going to come back to parenchyma cells in just a minute. The type of cells that make up the xylem are called tracheids. And these guys are long, thin cells with very tapered ends. Okay? They're generally wider, shorter, thinner walled, less tapered. Sorry, the vessels are generally wider, shorter, thinner walled, less tapered than tracheids, and they'll line up end to end to make these micropipes. If we sat there and waited for osmosis to completely direct straight through from the very roots to the very top of the 200-foot tall trees, it would take years. So sometimes we have to have these go-arounds that we're going to talk about in a bit, okay? And these guys help with that by creating those micro-pipe situations. In the phloem, well, like we said, it transports sugars and other organic nutrients. Sieve tube cells are what make up the actual phloem. Okay, to line up end to end, again forming long tubes because we're trying to get to the very top of the tree, from the top to the roots and from the roots to the top. Non-conducting cells called companion cells will be alongside that, and they'll connect them through the plasmodesmata. Plasmodesmata is basically, so I have a cell, bad cell. I have a plant cell, I have another plant cell next to it. Well, I don't know if you remember from chapter 6, in the very, very first unit, we talked about extracellular matrix. Okay, that's the area that's right between cells. Okay? That's the plasmodesmata in plants. All right? Sometimes you have these transport of nutrients that's able to go through the plasmodesmata, allowing everything to go through much faster. Man, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that more. Meristems. What magic word is in the word meristems? Oh, look at that. Stems. And what are stem cells? Hopefully you're all telling me that stem cells are cells that can become anything. Unspecialized cells that can become absolutely anything in animals. Well, meristem cells are the same thing, but in plants. They had to have a different name. All right. Apical found the tips of roots and shoots. Anywhere there's new growth, you're going to have meristem cells. It makes sense. If you have new growth, some of that new growth is going to become dermal tissue, some of it's going to become vascular, and some of it's going to become ground. So you have to have that variation, okay? You have to be able to come at anything, whatever that particular shoot or root tip need, okay? It can also be lateral, found in stems, allows the plant to increase in width. When plants grow, how do they grow first? Do they first grow in height or in width? Hopefully you're staying in height. Because what plants have to get to the very first sunlight. Whoever gets to the sunlight first has a better chance of surviving. Then, eventually, they got to get nice and thick, otherwise, good strong winds will come around, whip them across in half. That lateral meristem is also called the vascular cambium or cork cambium. What can be made out of that? Ooh, let me see. Cork, depending on its location. All right? Almost through with 35, guys. Primary growth is in length, secondary is in thickness. Now, let's talk about the root tips. Excuse this analogy, but it's the best one I got. The tip of a root is triangular, very similar to the tip of a bullet. What's the purpose of the bullet? That tip is to have the most force in the smallest area, allowing it to pierce through the flesh. Yes? That's for the tip of a bullet. Same concept for the tip of a root cap. That root tip, which is the very top of the root cap, is going to allow the root to go through the soil, trying to dig through, finding those little pockets of nutrients, water, what have you, okay? So your roots are going to have that root tip on it, all right? As meristem divides, of course, you can have meristem there. Remember, unspecialized cells, they can become anything. Push the cell forward into the root cap and backward into the root. Behind the meristem are the areas of elongation and maturation. And you'll recognize a lot of these pictures that you're seeing right here in your actual lab. Okay, 2 more slides, please. Vascular bundles. These guys are arrangements of xylem and phloem with cambium in between them. There is again a difference in the vascular bundling in monocots and dicots. I'm going to let you take a look at that in the lab. Amazing how the lab's overlapping with the lecture. It's almost like I planned it. Covered in an epidermal layer, which contains specialized guard cells around the openings of the stomata. So remember, you got a leaf. On the bottom of the leaf, you have these holes. They're like the nostrils for us. These holes allow for the gas exchange for the plant. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide in. That was not a mistake. I'm going to say it again. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide in, oxygen out, carbon dioxide out, right? Because both photosynthesis and cellular respiration are occurring in the plants. So you've got these openings, but you don't always want those openings to be open. Sometimes you need them to shut. If there's not a lot of sunlight, or if there's excess heat and excess water loss from that. By the way, do you remember what water loss of plants are when they lose water from their stomatas? It's called transpiration. Okay, gotta make sure you remember that word. Please make sure you remember that word. So, sometimes we need to close up those stomatas, like I was saying, and that's where the guard cells come into place. The guard cells are going to go ahead and swell up and close the opening of the stomatas. So it's kind of like tunnels, all right? Those openings are always there. But if something comes in and blocks those openings, then those tunnels are not closed. So the guard cells are what's closing the tunnels in the stomatas, okay? Ground tissue is primarily parenchyma. Remember we talked about that. And they're found between two layers of the epidermis and are referred to as the mesophyll. So the mesophyll is where photosynthesis is occurring. Veins run throughout the leaf consisting of xylem and phloem, surrounded by bundle sheath cells, and plenty of really cool slides to see that with. That's it for 35. All right. Well, we'll see you in a minute for 36.